begin in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You can't make a podcast without a few fragments of silicon.
All right, welcome to another installment of the Fragments Silicon European interviews. This week, returning after a lengthy absence, is Phil Elliott of the Square Enix Collective.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, it's going fine. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm very good, very good. It's been a pretty busy start to the year for us. So yeah, really good to be back and able to chat.
Indeed. And the last year was pretty busy for you guys. Like, you launched quite a few games, if I'm recalling correctly, like 6 or 7?
Yeah, that's right. We had Black the Fall and Children of Zodiacs and Tokyo Dark and Deadbeat Heroes and Oh My Godheads. And I've got a sneaking suspicion I've forgotten one as well in all there. So yeah, it was quite intense. We did quite a few games, including 2 in May within a week of each other. So that was definitely a new experience and not one I'm looking to repeat again soon. But yeah, good fun all the same.
Yeah, I'm suspecting that experience was a bad one.
Well, it was just frantic. I think it's easy, perhaps easy to underestimate the amount of work that just goes into releasing a game. Even once it's been finished on the development side. But there are so many moving parts, particularly when you're looking at cross-platform releases, which these games were: PC, PlayStation, Xbox. And just trying to get everything at the right time in the right way. It's a lot of fun. Doing it for one game is hard enough, but when you're trying to do 2 games within 7 days of each other with a small team and working with developers that are remote from you as well, it's a good challenge. It's a good way to grow old quick.
Oh dear.
No, it's all good. I mean, in the end, to be honest, it was fantastic to see them go out there without any hitches. So, I think looking back at experiences like that, you think, okay, well, we perhaps we'll plan to have them a little bit more spread out, but it's one of those things. The way we work is that we don't take creative control, we don't take IP rights. So we want to be able to release the game as soon as humanly possible when the developer's ready, because they need the money, right? And we don't want to wait a minute longer than we have to. So we try where possible to do that just as soon as we can. But I think after that we did sort of say, look, we need at least 2 weeks between games, because it's a little bit tricky.
No doubt. I mean, how big is the collective at this point?
It's a difficult question to ask. I mean, I suppose in terms of games now, we're going to be 10, 11, 12 games by the end of April this year. Since mid 2016, so it's been it's sort of coming along nicely. But I would say that it's not been all fantastic, exciting times. It's been quite challenging as well, and certainly 2017 was a difficult year, I think, for a lot of people in the PC games industry, as the number of games being released went up quite significantly, and that kind of thing definitely has impacted us. I think it's impacted anyone that has that's released original IP from small developers. So yeah, we sort of came into this year feeling perhaps a bit anxious as to what 2018 would bring. But it's been a really good start to the year. We had Battalion 1944 release at the beginning of February, and that was actually our biggest success to date, despite it only being in early access. So yeah, we're looking ahead to the rest of 2018, but there will be some changes for us, I think, in the way that we look to choose different kinds of projects and focusing on different things, because I think, to be fair, in a world where perhaps 200 games are released on Steam in a week. The model that we originally settled on for the way that we wanted to work with teams, I think it's we need to pretty sure that we can actually make a difference and move the needle for teams, and that sort of model, I think, is less reliable than it was when there were fewer games being released.
Definitely. We have had many conversations with other developers about this whole, the name they give it is the indie apocalypse.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's definitely a thing that's affecting everybody in the PC gaming space, at the very least. On consoles, it's a bit different right here in this particular moment because the Nintendo Switch is a really hotbed for the indie scene. But pretty much everyone we've talked to thinks that's a very temporary thing.
I think it's going to be interesting to see where the Switch goes with respect to what we'd consider as kind of the big AAA games from the third-party publishers. Obviously, Nintendo will always release its own big games like Zelda and Mario Odyssey have been fantastic, and there've been quite a few others happily. But I think the fact that the Switch has been so much more successful than the Wii U, I'm sure that's going to be interesting for publishers to see that as a genuine opportunity. And yeah, I guess it's possible that if we see some of the popular multi-platform franchises, or even some platform exclusives coming from those other publishers, well, I guess it's all down to Nintendo as to how they want to curate their platform. Are they happy to see 20, 30, 50 games a week being released on Switch, or do they prefer to keep it down to sort of 15 or 20 and handpick those more? I mean, there are benefits and there are drawbacks for either approach, really. So I think that remains to be seen. But I think it's nice to see Nintendo embracing the indie developers, and I think it's really important that teams feel they do have options in terms of where they can release their games.
Certainly, I'm like, especially where they can find success, like however limited the window might be.
Yeah, and I think probably by the end of this year. Well, again, it entirely depends on what Nintendo's strategy is here, and I haven't got any insight I can share with you on that, I'm afraid. But yeah, I think it's a tough decision for any platform holder to take. On the one hand, you want lots of variety and lots of content, lots of games there for people to buy, so that they feel like buying the hardware is is going to give you endless supply of joyful experiences. But then on the other hand, you also need the content creators, the developers, and publishers, I guess, to feel like those platforms are an opportunity, not just to be there, but actually to as you say, have some success, have an opportunity to sell some games. And I think it's come along at a good time. But there's always a lag. Teams sort of developing games now, hoping to release in 2019. I'm sure there are a lot of indie developers thinking, well, Nintendo's suddenly my first choice platform. Yeah, I guess at some point there will be a signal to noise ratio change that makes it a bit of a challenge. But I don't think it's necessarily a foregone conclusion. As I say, in the end, it sort of comes down to how Nintendo wants to operate there, and they're being pretty open at the moment and pretty welcoming. That's good. But they may change that. They may want to be a bit more precise or specific about the projects they let be published on the platform.
I've heard conflicting things about how Nintendo's operating things. I think it might come down to the branch. Like I've heard,
yeah.
The European and Japanese branches are a bit more open than NOA right now. I don't know how true those assertions are, since I haven't spoken to Nintendo or anything about that, but this is just what I've heard from developers. In terms of larger third parties, your own Square Enix seems to have plans for the system.
Well, we just released Fear Effect Sedna, in fact, Collective, yeah. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, previously, Lost Sphere was released as well, and
Right.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't actually know what what the rest of Square Enix has plans for with respect to the Switch. But I do think it's definitely, it's been great to see Nintendo come back strong after the disappointment. I think, a lot of people felt with the Wii U. Um, I think inevitably after a platform doesn't do so well, as everyone would hope, and it was, just to be fair, the original Wii was a really tough thing to follow because it had vastly more success than I think a lot of games press would have expected. Um, but after that dip, I think it's inevitable that people are going to be a little bit cautious, and they're just going to want to see exactly what that hardware is, what it does, how people embrace it before committing fully to it. So I'm sure we'll see. Yeah, a lot of publishers sort of bring their bigger games, and hopefully some sort of new concepts and new ideas that really take advantage of the specific platform features as well.
Once again, going to Square Enix, they got that Project Octopath Traveler in development for the system, Japanese side.
Yeah, it's not a project I'm familiar with, unfortunately. So yeah, I
Yeah.
can't speak to that. But no, I mean, it certainly wouldn't surprise me to think there are probably going to be some solid plans in place.
Yeah. Well, I suppose narrowing it down, outside of what's been released, Fear Effect Sedna and Black the Fall, what are your plans for the Nintendo Switch? If there's anything you can elaborate on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, as far as I can, I'm always happy to be as open as possible. At the moment, we are looking at the potential for taking one or two of the games that we released previously and actually bringing in Switch. It's really just a case of talking to the developers and finding out what they want to do. Not everybody wants to put time in on that. In a lot of cases, they'll have moved on to next projects and so on. So, I think for the games that that we're releasing next, there are no new plans for Switch games. But what I can say is that I'd expect certainly one of the games released in another one of the games released in 2017 to appear on Switch before the end of this year for sure, and possibly more. But yeah, I mean, we're always sort of talking to developers and sort of seeing what they want to do, and if they think there's an opportunity there, is it something we can help with? So yeah, I mean, there's still some conversations ongoing. I think in terms of new signings, we're going to wait actually for a little while. We're probably going to wait until the end of what I call Slate One. So Slate One kind of represents for us all of the games signed under the original model of working, and that really ends with Octahedron and Forgotten Anne in the next couple of months. And then after that, I think we'll sort of take a look back across the whole of the slate and sort of look at the ups and the downs and where we feel we did well and where we feel that we didn't perform as well as we could have. What could we have done differently? Is there something we overlooked that we should have really taken into account? What were the similarities between the teams that were successful? Should we have done more to mentor teams or all those kinds of questions? And I think at that point, we're not going to take on any new projects until we can sort of really get a clear idea of what the best approach is going to be for us, in the current market. So, it's certainly not, the end of Collective by any means. But we're going to take a little bit of a pause, I think, just to make sure that we are going to be responsible in the way that we take up new titles. It'll be very easy for us to sign, another 10 games for this year, another 10 games for next year, and sort of keep going on like that. But, the reason for us taking games on isn't to mindlessly try and bring profit into the business. As I've said before, any profit we make on Collective games goes back into investing into indie development. But if we're not able to feel that we can, if not guarantee, then at least be pretty sure of a certain level of return for developers by us working with them, then in the end, all we're going to do is we're going to put money in, and then we're going to take money out. And if a developer isn't better off by working with us at the end of that process, then we're not really doing something that's good for them. So I suspect we'll pick up fewer games. They might well be bigger games. Might be perhaps more emphasis on games which can develop over a longer period of time. Certainly, we're going to continue to support Battalion 1944, and I'm sure there'll be an announcement of another project in the coming months from us. But yeah, it's I guess a sign of the times. I like to think that we will be going back to picking up some of the smaller games as well, teams that we see with a little spark of talent, and mix them in with a few bigger investments as well.
Indeed. I mean, that's quite a lot of soul searching you got planned there.
I think part of the challenge I've personally found with Collective in the past year is that there's a big weight of responsibility. I think if you just look at numbers and you just look at names and things on paper, and games are games, and part of the point of having a portfolio is that if a few don't do so well, then hopefully a few will, and it'll all balance out, and maybe one will break out and be a big success, and that's great. And frankly, that's pretty much how it's worked out. So from the cold analytical side of things, I mean, 2017 was tough, but as we sort of closing out, as I say, slate one, on balance, we're probably roughly where we expected to be, which is good. However, what that doesn't really describe is the sort of, I think maybe what's easy to overlook when people are just looking at the raw numbers, and that is the people behind the games. And when we sign games, it's the people behind the games are the fundamentally important thing. And regardless if of most of the games we've published have gone on to break even in terms of our investment into them, so that the developers are then going to be earning 70% on those games, and in most cases that will then help them to go on and fund their next game, which is always the plan. But when there are a couple of exceptions, and those teams don't do what we hoped they would, and the success isn't there, for me personally, it's never, I can never forget that in the end it's people with families to feed and mortgages to pay, and at that point, regardless of whether we'll obviously have done everything we feel we could have done, and in some cases more than we should have actually, it's still tough, because I don't like to see those people struggle and potentially fail, and that kind of thing happens all the time, right? And I suspect that with the market changes, proportionally, more developers will fail than succeed. When you compare this year to last year or the year before, but yeah, it's very hard for me just to be kind of cold and unemotional about that. I think it's an industry about people and the experiences they create, and so to divorce that side of it from the financial and business side is a bit too sterile for my liking. So yeah, a bit of soul searching, and fundamentally, I think we can never know what's going to happen in the next couple of years, but we want to try and approach it in a way that we feel is going to be responsible and give teams the best chance of getting good results from working with us, really.
I can certainly understand that perspective, especially through the lens of this show, because we have developers week in, week out tell us their stories. Hell, we spoke to pretty much everyone, like from the collective.
Yes, indeed.
I'm like, I think the only ones we never got were Cherry Mochi.
Oh right, yeah. I mean, that was a great team, and Tokyo Dark was definitely one that we were happy to see do pretty well. But yeah, it's I think the interesting thing is the expectations perhaps around launch versus what's possible with games over the course of a couple of years, and I think we were used to seeing this kind of emphasis on the first week or the first 24 hours in some cases. If that has to, now obviously there's a practical necessity for a studio that they fund, the game is funded, but that money's going to run out at some point. And what I would say is that every game that we've signed has been delayed for whatever reason, and all of those delays have been developer-based decisions. Sometimes they've been at our advice because the game just isn't passing QA. But in the end, we as I say, we're not the IP owners, so we're not going to force get people to delay their games. or artificially or anything like that. And so that's been an interesting learning point. First of all, clearly, when we sign games, we need to really encourage teams to build in even more time to sort of get that final polish into games. But of course, if every game delays, then that means that every studio is going to be coming into release period, pretty hot in terms of what their remaining funds are. So there is an importance to, getting a decent paycheck and as soon as possible from those initial sales, because that will help you through the first few months post release. But if a team can get through that, then the way that the world works now with, particularly on Steam, but also on the consoles, the regular promotions, and also the fact that you can be pretty sure, that you're going to get a decent bump in earnings, at Christmas with a winter sale, at Easter, in the summer, at Thanksgiving, or whatever the different sales are, Halloween and stuff. That game can continue to actually provide meaningful revenue for a good couple of years, as the price comes down, obviously, with each promotion. But then, so lots of new people take that game on, and then of course you have things like humble bundles, or if you're on console, maybe games with gold or PlayStation Plus, which can give you a sort of a lump sum of revenue in return for making the game freely available to subscribers and so on. And so there are definitely options, I think, for a game to earn, maybe 4 or 5 times the amount over 2 years that it would do in the first month or so. And hopefully, that change can help teams once they've got a few of these games released. That kind of trickle down income can help sustain teams, even if perhaps that initial success wasn't quite what they hoped.
Right. I've been hearing about this for ages. The long tail of digital games.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we see that for sure as a big company with big franchises. I mean, games like Sleeping Dogs or older Tomb Raider games still sell really well. They shift a lot of units. I mean, the price is obviously much cheaper now because it's they're older games, but they make meaningful revenue, and it's an important thing. Obviously, that doesn't happen to the same degree for original IPs and indie games, because they're just not as well known. And I think certainly what we've seen is the importance of the wish list has, on Steam specifically, is probably more important than it's ever been. I mean, it's always been pretty important, but now, the more that you can do to drive up interest pre-release and get that wish list number as high as you can, then we tend to see a proportion of that translated into sales at launch. But that number then, hopefully, if there's a decent spike in awareness, that number will continue to grow, and then if you can get it up to 100,000 or something like that, then that's going to give you a lot of confidence for the next couple of years that you can sort of keep chipping away at that. And if you don't snag someone with 30% off, maybe you'll get them a few months later with 40% or something like that. So yeah, it's a really useful tool for indies as well as AAA studios.
No doubt. I mean, it's interesting you bring this up since Square Enix had a pretty large sale on Steam just this past weekend.
Yes, the publisher sale. I mean, those are always good. I think most publishers that sell games on Steam will have one of those at some point. And I mean, certainly for us, I think it brings the benefit of lots of visibility on Steam. But of course, unlike the big kind of seasonal sales that you have on Steam, where pretty much everything is reduced, it's more focused. So you get lots of upside, but without the competition of visibility. So yeah, they definitely work well. And I mean, I was just looking at the numbers for the Turing Test, which was a game we released in August 2016, and a few more tens of thousands of dollars over the weekend, which is great news for Bulkhead, the studio behind it. And I think at this point it's revenue that they won't have forecast or planned for. But I mean, as they wait for the first paycheck from Battalion, 1944, it's probably coming in at a great time.
No doubt. Now, an exception to all this is, well, the game that is releasing today or got released or whatever, Fear Effect, Sedna, and the whole Fear Effect initiative from the past few years. What are your thoughts on how this has all borne out? Are you pleased that you were able to resurrect Fear Effect? Do you think the resurrection went well and all that?
Yes, good question. So I think sort of rewinding to what our original idea was with this IP, it was, can we make it available to indies to give them something to work on that is just that little bit easier to get awareness from and hopefully, make some money out of versus original IP. From our side, obviously, we didn't have any plans for Fear Effect. We weren't going to create a new game ourselves. So from that perspective, we have this IP, this franchise just kind of effectively gathering dust on a shelf. So we wanted to sort of test the idea, and so we did this with I think Gex and Acronox and Fear Effect were the three that we sort of threw out there to see what interest there would be. Fear Effect was the one that was picked up, and we saw an early concept for that, which we approved. We required them to take it to Kickstarter to kind of prove that there was going to be interest in the project, which we were then sort of able to part fund. They had some Kickstarter funds and they put their own money in as well. And but the intention was never to remake Fear Effect in a kind of make sort of another. Well, I mean, Fear Effect back in the day was effectively AAA. Obviously, the intention this time around was not to try to recreate what Fear Effect necessarily was back then, but to allow a team to put more of an indie spin on it. So, the budget, the time for development, was way less than perhaps, people would have expected when they see, oh, there's another Fear Effect game coming out. And I think, that's perhaps been a bit of a problem. I've seen a lot of people sort of comment that this isn't really the Fear Effect they were expecting. And I guess, in the end, that's one of the challenges we were aware of, is because it's from a big franchise, is that, what are people's expectations going to be going into the game? I think whether you like the game or not is obviously going to be, a subjective decision. I think that in terms of what it is, it's an indie take on Fear Effect that came in, with a certain budget and a certain amount of time. I think in terms of what it's leading to, we've already announced that Fear Effect Reinvented, is going to be created, which is the original Fear Effect in, sort of brought up to date with kind of modern day visuals, but very much that original game. And I think that, the response to that when we announced it last year in August was very, very strong. And I think, might we do that with other games? Might you see some of the old IDOS classics, given a sort of the HD remake or, reinvented process? It's possible. But I think we'll see. We didn't expect Fear Effect Sedna to, be a million seller or anything like that. Will it provide a good dose of income for the developer to, again, help them to go on and create new games independently and creatively? That remains to be seen. I think it doesn't need to sell 1 million units to do that. So hopefully, there will be a good number of people out there that enjoy that experience. Maybe some people new to the Fear Effect franchise. But yeah, it's certainly, we didn't have any kind of AAA expectations of it.
Well, that's good. I mean, I think I've been keeping track of the reviews, and they have been, they've been pretty savage, if I'm being honest here.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were expecting it to be more like the old ones than it ended up being.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, that was something we always tried to help the team manage that expectation, but it's difficult. I think, even though it's, it went through the Kickstarter process and the team have tried to be very vocal about what their intentions were and what their, the extent of their resources and stuff were, then, I mean, expectation is always tough. But I think, reviewers, in the end of the day, they have to come to a game. Everyone has to come to the game and be honest about what they feel about it based on what their expectations, what their beliefs, what their appraisal is. And if people don't get on with it for whatever reason, then that's absolutely their right to say so. I mean, I've seen very mixed reviews. I've seen some low scores. I've seen some high scores. I think everything we've tracked so far today, although not all that stuff's on Metacritic, but it's kind of around the 6.5, 6.6 kind of averaging at the moment, which I think, considering that if you look back at the original Fear Effect, they were also games back then. Even the originals divided opinion, so perhaps it's not so unexpected. But I think we'll see. People are going to have the remake to look forward to. I think it's going to be very faithful to the original game, and so if that is genuinely what they're looking for, then perhaps they'll find something more they're liking there.
I've certainly seen excitement over Reinvented, because I can't blame anyone who was a fan of the old games not really taking to this new one, because it is such a radical departure from what came before.
Yeah, I mean, is there look, the Kickstarter raised just over €100,000. They put some money in. We put a little bit of money in as well to help them. But even then, what are the chances of making a sort of fully 3D environment, with everything that you were kind of used to then, and sort of make it? I think the more that it's similar to the old games, the more expectations would have of it being a genuine AAA game. So in a way, I think the hope was that by being very clear about, right from the start, about, look, we're trying to make a meaningful difference from the older games, to try to make it as clear as possible to people that this is a different take on it. I think what they've done tremendously, actually, is that they've been very true to the characters and the the storyline sort of feels like it's a Fear Effect story. But when it comes to the gameplay shift, I mean, that's going to be down to individual tastes. So we'll see. I think in terms of more people being aware of it than if this had been just an original IP game, I think that's probably true. That inevitably is going to bring with it perhaps some challenges, but I don't I don't think that this would necessarily, from our side, if we had another pitch coming for another game in the back catalogue, I don't think this would sort of scare us away. I think it's just we'd look on everything according to its merits and see what we feel.
Yeah. No doubt. Now, in terms of like Fear Effect Reinvented, this game isn't using Kickstarter, and I believe the reason why that Sushi's going to be able to recreate the original game is because of Forever Entertainment.
That's right. Yeah.
Like, now, how did they enter this whole Fear Effect experiment?
Well, they were actually they also put a little bit of money into Sedna as well to help the devs. So we worked with them, effectively a kind of a three-way agreement, and they met with Sushi, the developers, and obviously got on well and expressed an interest in supporting them that way. And so I mean, when it came to Reinvented, because they'd already been working together, I guess they sort of saw the opportunity there. They both both Forever and Sushi came over to London to present the concept to us here at Square Enix, and we thought, well, why not? This seems like an interesting idea. We had no idea what kind of demand there'd be for it, because I think it's always very, very hard to gauge that kind of thing with older titles. And I mean, I don't mind admitting that I was surprised when we announced the game during Gamescom, and I was running around the show floor, rushed off my feet. Gamescom, for anybody who's had the opportunity to actually go to Gamescom, they know just how hectic it is. It's just a writhing mass of human flesh at the busiest of times.
Seems accurate.
Yes.
The thing of it is, people don't know how big Gamescom is. It's actually like the biggest convention out there, literally.
It is huge, and there, I think there's nothing quite like standing in the hallway between the various halls and sort of looking down the corridor and just seeing it absolutely crammed and wow, yeah, if that's just the corridor, imagine what the halls are like. We saw queues for queues at one point, which was kind of fun. But so there's so much going on there, and obviously we're very focused on the games we're showing there, and everything it's all been about that. And I start getting these emails and these messages, and then I start getting text messages and WhatsApp messages from friends back at home who aren't even particularly into games, and they're telling me about, I just heard about the original Fear Effects being brought back, and this. I'm like, oh yeah, we announced that today, didn't we? And because I'd been so busy with all the actual show floor stuff, I kind of forgot it. It sort of passed me by a little bit. And then, I started sort of talking to some people in the business area, and they're like, oh, just heard about the new Fear Effect being reinvented and this. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, no, we announced that today. And then some more people. And then later on that evening, I was having dinner with them, and someone said, oh, heard about the new Fear Effect. I'm thinking, hang on a minute. I've heard more people come to me and talk to me about Fear Effect Reinvented than anything we've announced to do with Collective so far. And then, when I finally got a chance to sort of check out various press websites, that seemed to be definitely one of the things they picked up on from all the announcements at Gamescom. So, yeah, it definitely took us a bit by surprise. So we're sort of excited to see what sort of interest that'll be. But it makes us think. What if there are other games that that people from the Western side of the business? I'm sure there are plenty from the Japanese arm of the business, but we can only really talk for the Western side. I mean, I could probably ask you that question. Are there any old IDOS classics that you think should be given the HD reinvented treatment?
Well, I mean, that depends on what perspective we're taking here. I mean,
well, it would have to be as is. It would have to be not the Sedna route, but very much the original game, but just updated.
Yeah. Well, in that regards, it seems like it's the time for 90s platformers to come back.
I miss Gex. I wouldn't mind that returning.
I wondered if you were going to say that.
I'm like, well, I mean, Bubsy came back last year. I'm like, Bubsy can come back. Anybody can come back.
That's very true.
It's time to get the shovel and pull it out of its grave.
I mean, I don't, and if we're talking about games I would like to see revived, I mean, the third game you put out there in Chrononox or
Anachronox, yeah.
Yeah. That game never got completed, but, that was a long time ago.
Yes, indeed.
Let's see. Other games, let's see. Probably Pandemonium. I liked that game back in the day.
Yeah. We get asked a lot about Legacy of Kain games, actually. And things like Thief and all these, and so I'm sure that I'm sure that there are opportunities, but we'll see. I think it's one of those things that we're always interested to hear feedback on, but at the same time, it's probably not the kind of thing we would do internally. So if developers have a particular interest in doing something like that, then who knows, maybe there will be Gex HD reinvented now with even more adult humor. I don't know.
Yay, more one-liners.
Yeah, more one-liners.
I mean, it would probably be updated, but that kind of humor is pretty decent right now. So
I think the thing is that and when you're making a new entry in a series, then you want to be faithful to the spirit of the original. But when you're making a remake of the original, then you have to be really, really spot on with how you translate that for modern day. And
that's true.
Sometimes I'd say some things are easier to translate, and humor actually is one of the things which is probably hardest. I mean, I think we've moved on socially a lot in the past 15, 20 years. A lot has changed even in the past sort of 4 or 5 years. So I think there are some things that would be less acceptable today, and maybe not so easily forgiven. And so, I'm sure that there would have to be some changes there. But yeah, who knows? Until somebody starts digging through it, and you never know.
Like I said, if Bubsy can come back, any mascot platformer can come back.
You heard it here first.
Well, that was one thing I was never expecting to see, but
you and about every other YouTuber on planet Earth.
Yeah, but thinking about it, it's not surprising that Bubsy came back, but that's a whole other discussion. Like, anyway, so in terms of Fear Effect Reinvented, what can you tell us about how this remake is going to play out at this point in time? And we haven't heard a lot about Reinvented because, well, Sedna's been in development.
Yeah, and I think I think obviously from here on in, the focus will switch, and at some point, there'll be a lot more to say about it. But I mean, there's no specific release dates set in stone at the moment. The tentative plan is to put it on PC and consoles, but exact details will be coming in the future. All I can say really is the idea is to try to be as faithful to the original and recreate the original in as accurate a way, but sort of bring it back with stronger visuals and higher fidelity and everything else. But there's no plan to change camera angles or I think there'll be one or two gameplay things that will need to be addressed because there are definitely some if you've ever gone back and played the original any time in the past sort of 10 years, you'll definitely notice that there's, and again, even when it was first released, there were some issues with some of the gameplay. So I think maybe some of the control stuff will be tweaked, but anything like that, anything that's going to change the original will have to be quite carefully examined.
No doubt. I'm really interested to see how it's going to play out from a narrative standpoint because, well, Fear Effect came before everything else.
Yeah.
And now we've got, Retro Helix, and Inferno apparently still counts, and Sedna now.
Yeah, the ever-evolving canon. But no, I mean, so a remake of the original would be very much the narrative of the original, remade and sort of faithfully recreated. So, yeah, I don't think there are any sort of big surprises planned there.
That's good. Because narrative changes like that can also be tricky.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you either. Well, I think it's difficult to say at this point because the game's not made, and I think until you go through it, until they start kind of, working on the prototyping for some of the sections and I don't anticipate any big deviation. Put it that way. The aim is to try to bring back the game. For those that love the original, of course, it was on PlayStation 1, so it's not possible to play it realistically nowadays. But there was a fan base for the game, and it's really just to sort of give people the opportunity to play again, but in a way that's a little easier on the eyes.
Indeed. Now, shifting away to other games, you do have, you've got Octahedron coming up this month as well.
Yeah.
So, for the uninitiated, what is this game?
So, this is going to be a bold claim, but Octahedron is probably one of the best pure platformers I've ever played. It is a game which manages to feel fresh, even though platforms have been around for 1 million years and been done 1 billion times. And that's because the gameplay feels really smooth, and it also links into the music. So everything that happens in the game is kind of on the beat. So the soundtrack plays a super important part in how the game kind of feels. It's actually really simple. You basically have to climb these levels, and the way that you do that is by surfing on these platforms that you create yourself. So in the first couple of levels, you learn how that happens, and you've got to sort of avoid the various pitfalls and things like that. But as the game goes on, then sort of lots more kind of depth and complexity is added, which means that when you kind of cruise into the last third of the game, it becomes extremely challenging. I'm looking forward actually to seeing speedrunners kind of get their hands on this game to see how they fare, because there's the potential for this game you can either play it and sort of try and complete it as best you can, or you can play it and be super stylish in the process. There's lots of collectibles, there's lots of things to do, and some of the optional stuff is actually you have to be really good at the game to pull it off, even in the early levels. So So yeah, but effectively, it's a platform game. It's kind of super bright neon colors, and a really awesome soundtrack, kind of house trance kind of style. Yeah, it all comes together in something which you have to play it to really understand it. When I first kind of saw it, I thought, oh, it kind of looks interesting. I played it and I'm like, okay, right, I love this game.
Well, where did you discover this project?
I actually first saw it and played it at Rezzed in the UK last year, at the end of March. So it was almost a year ago. Well, I guess by the time it's released, it'll be almost exactly a year. And yeah, as I say, somebody said, "Oh, you should go and try it. You should go and look at it." And I kind of looked at it and I thought, yeah, okay, yeah, it does have an interesting visual style, but it's a platform. I mean, how does a platform feel fresh in 2018 or 2017 as it was last year? But I did the person who recommended it the courtesy of actually having a go, put the headphones on, and yeah, you just sort of get sucked into this thing. And we've had some people coming into the office, some YouTubers and so on, and the original plan was for them to kind of play it for 20 minutes, and kind of like an hour and a half later, they're still playing. Like, can we just play for 10 more minutes? Just 10 more minutes. And and it's one of those games where it's like, oh yeah, you get it. It's you understand what you need to do, and then you kind of do a little bit of practicing, and it feels good when you get used to the rhythm of creating the sort of jumping up, spawning the platform, and then kind of surfing it across the screen. And then suddenly you go from doing that to having to do it multiple times, sort of jump up, spawn, surf, jump up, spawn, surf. You can only spawn one platform at a time, so you've got to get the timing right. And then suddenly you kind of realize you're actually doing it to the timing, to the beat of the music, and everything around you is kind of moving in that same sort of rhythm. And it just feels like this almost poetic sort of action. And if you sort of feel the music, actually it helps you to play the game better. And then you play the game better and you realize that what you're producing on the screen is this really stylish, a very cool kind of kaleidoscope of color as you ascend these levels and try and beat the game.
It reminds me, from what I've seen, a couple of different games. First is N+, if you've ever played that.
Yep.
Because I find on the indie scene, there aren't a lot of platformers that actually take into account the platforming. That may seem weird, but there's not a lot of platforming games out there that are actually interested in the mechanics of platformers versus, using it to a means to an end.
Yes, yeah. So so I mean, often you'll see genre mix. They might call it an RPG even rather than a platformer, but yeah, you're absolutely right. And I guess that was one of the things that I sort of queried, when I said, well, what, it's clearly a platformer, but what is it going to do that, that makes it different or better to anything else that's out there? So yeah, I definitely go along with that. The other one that I hear come back is, people sort of reference games like Rez, which is nice. I think that's a fantastic company to be in, and I totally see why people say that as well.
Yeah. The other game it reminds me of is Electronic Super Joy. I'm not sure if you've ever heard that one.
I'm not familiar with that one. No.
Oh well, it's a game
I'm
where
make a note of that then.
Yeah. It's a platforming game series where you jump in terms of the beat. Let's just say.
Okay. Yep.
I'll leave it at that for the moment. But
okay. Oh, nice one. Well, is that a recommendation?
Sure. It's just be careful. I'm like,
or is there a caveat there?
Well, it's quite orgasmic, literally.
Okay, all right. Like, warning duly noted.
Anyway, the other upcoming project is Forgotten Anne.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about this before, but it seems to be getting close to release here.
Yes, yeah, we're not far now. That's the good news. So it's a game that I first saw that back in, I think, 2015 at Nordic Game, which is a developer conference that takes place in I think it's May in Malmo in Sweden, just right in the south corner, just over the road bridge from Copenhagen in Denmark. And I mean, as soon as I saw it, I just totally fell in love with the visuals. I mean, you know, if you've not seen it, you know, anybody's not seen it, go kind of check it out. Forgotten is spelt with an O at the end, not an E, so Forgotten. And there is a reason for that. It's not just a daft spelling mistake. But you know, if you're a fan of the Studio Ghibli stuff at all, then yeah, hopefully Forgotten Anne will feel right at home with you. But yeah, no, the game's been coming along well. Yeah, but I desperately want to tell you, but it's very close. There'll be news very soon.
Mm. I've been looking forward to this one ever since I've seen it, because yeah, it really looks good.
Yeah, I think it's one of those games that, you know, to be honest, deserves the last amount of time to really kind of polish it. And that's literally the phase we're in now. You know, we just really want to make sure that the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted before it goes into submission. So yes, rest assured, it will be, expect months, not years, put it that way.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. Now in terms of the live projects initiative, is that still a thing you're doing?
Yes, it is. Yeah, we've actually, you know, we had some good feedback. So, and just for reference, this is the Square Enix Collective website, where what we do is, you know, every week we post a new pitch, and then we ask the Square Enix community to basically give developers feedback and vote on whether or not it's the sort of game they'd be interested in supporting in some way in the future. So we continue to do that. We reopened it at the end of January, and we plan to continue making that service available for people. We found that it is doing exactly what we wanted it to do. One of the examples from last year was a game called Relegend, which was, I think it was on Collective around the middle of last year. Now, the pitches that are published on the Collective website, those are not games that we will then necessarily go on and publish. Some in the past we have done for some of them, but there's no sort of agreements in place or anything like that. You know, just to be clear for people, because sometimes I think they misunderstand and assume that, you know, all these games that they see are sort of going to be signed by us and published. But yeah, Relegend, which is kind of like a sort of a 3D anime Harvest Moon type game, I guess. That's probably not really doing it justice, but yeah, as a brief genre style, that gives you an idea. It was actually the most successful in terms of views and votes that we had on the platform up until that point, despite the platform being around for nearly 3 years. And it then went on, and they completely independently ran a really successful Kickstarter campaign where I think they raised several $100,000 for that. And I know that after that, you know, they had a lot of interest from lots of big publishers, and the future ahead for that team, I think, is going to be very exciting. So, you know, that's what we hoped we would see, that kind of thing happening. And as long as we feel that that's going to be the case, you know, there's still lots of people voting on the game, still leaving feedback, and you know, it's really about trying to help teams tap into the community that we have as a big company, and you know, if people see something they like, then you know, they've it's sort of introducing them to new ideas and new teams. So yeah, we expect that to continue.
That's good to hear. And what about crowdfunding? Is that still a thing that's being pursued here in 2018?
Yeah, so we sort of put that on hold about this time last year, because at that point we looked ahead and saw that we had a lot of releases, and I just wasn't confident that we could handle the releases and all the Kickstarter campaigns. And I think, to be honest, I was completely right. I don't think we would have, you know, managed it. I'm not sure we would have survived, particularly, you know, at times. I already mentioned the 2 games in 2 weeks. Imagine if there was a Kickstarter campaign going on at the same time as that. I think it would have been the end of us. So I sort of expected to get to the end of 2017 and you know, sort of see very clearly which direction would we go. And I think, to be honest, actually, that's sort of still on hold. it's still not a definitely yes, and it's still not a definitely no. I think that the crowdfunding scene has kind of settled down a lot from its sort of quite volatile highs of a few years ago. I certainly wouldn't rule out supporting Kickstarters in the future, but I don't think we'll announce anything soon. I think we'll get to the end of the releases for Slate 1 and then see. I think one of the potential benefits of doing fewer but bigger games is that we should have more time in between releases. And it could be that which sort of enables us to take that idea on again. But certainly I think that, Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general is still a really good place for developers to actually find some funding. I think the amounts don't seem to be quite there that they for video games that they were historically. But I think if you've got a good pitch and a good idea and you can sort of generate that awareness, I think you can still raise some viable funding. So I hope that we'll be able to support that sort of thing again in the future.
I'll never say never.
Indeed.
Yeah. Now here's a question. Do you see like the collective ever engaging in things like MOBAs, free to play, Minecraft type games, survival?
Well, there's a lot of questions there, not just one.
Basically, games that are much larger in terms of support that get updated a lot.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I don't know about free to play because I'm not sure that we are necessarily set up to do the marketing that you need for that kind of thing, because it's a very different shape. Performance marketing, it's all about reinvesting income and putting it into cost per acquisition of users and all that kind of thing. And I think that at the moment we don't really have the expertise to focus on that. We have it elsewhere within Square Enix, but I think for now we're going to focus more on premium projects. I think in terms of ongoing games, then yeah, absolutely. Bigger projects, persistent worlds, maybe even MMOs, survival games. I certainly wouldn't rule them out. Minecraft style games, I certainly wouldn't rule that out. I think this is what I mean by fewer, bigger. I like the idea of games which will be live for a longer period of time in order for that game to really grow. I think the pressure at the moment on games is very much, if you have a single player narrative led experience, then we talked a little bit about the long tail, but there still is this pressure on, you've kind of got one shot to make it good. And if you don't make it good at launch, then have you lost that moment? Are you ever going to get that chance again? And in some cases, yes, but, mostly I think, people move on. Whereas if you've got a game, Battalion is a persistent game. It's an online multiplayer shooter. There will be more maps, there'll be more weapons, there'll be more updates and all sorts coming in the next 11 months until full release and more beyond that. So yeah, I would definitely expect us to be working on maybe 2 or 3 of those kinds of games each year, rather than kind of 8 to 10 of the sort of smaller, more discrete experiences. And so that's something we're sort of working towards and looking to make sure we're in a good place to support.
That's certainly a very of the moment struggle, because it kind of reflects what's going on in the larger spaces. Single player narrative games versus what they call live service games or games as service.
So I think part of it comes down to. So what I will say is that by no means do I think that this is the end of the road for single player narrative led experiences. I think that what we see is costs rising. For us, we're probably looking to make big. Need to have a certain way of being able to have a greater potential, I guess. And that's not to say that all Battalion's got to someday become PUBG or something like that, but it's more to say that the game has the chance to stick around for a long time, to grow and to evolve, because we do see that with technology and the way that people play games today, something can be around for 12 to 18 months, and then suddenly it takes off because it just finds the right audience, or it just finds the right person to promote it or to endorse it, or it just introduces that new feature that suddenly ties everything together. And so it's not like the game just has one chance to impress. and then it's a case of patching the bugs out or whatever. There's more opportunity to actually continue to evolve and to build on that original work, and I find that quite exciting. And certainly when we think about what an MMO represents, I mean, I guess if you'd asked me, would you ever work on an MMO through Collective? A few years ago, I'd probably have laughed at the idea. But actually, the nature of what an MMO is, it doesn't have to be that kind of absolute top-end Elder Scrolls or FF14 or World of Warcraft thing. In terms of persistent worlds, I think we see them in all shapes and sizes now. And I think that's also really exciting too.
No doubt, no doubt. Just as long as there's still a place for the single-player narrative stuff.
Well, I love single-player narrative games. So I certainly hope. To be honest, any time that there's demand for something, I think the way that the market is nowadays, there are ways for gamers to voice that opinion clearly, and there are ways for developers to create what is being demanded. This is where Kickstarter kind of started out, was by plugging that gap. People wanted those kind of older style RPG games, or they wanted those point and click adventures, and they became possible by that. And I don't think that kind of concept is going to go away. I think that it's the lid is off that particular Pandora's box, and I think that's a good thing. Also, I think the communication now that we have with social media and everything, the sort of clamor of demand for certain things, it's not like you had to write into your I don't know, Game Informer or whatever and hope that your letter got published on the letters page. We live in a very different world now, and I think it's much easier for communities of gamers to actually make their opinions and their voices heard. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be the end of the road for single player narrative games.
Indeed, I think that as well. Right, so we're getting low on time here, so just a few more questions.
Sure.
What can you speak to of the larger Square Enix Europe? What are they doing right now?
Loads. There's lots of exciting things happening, but the vast majority of them I can't talk about, sadly. Don't you just hate that? Obviously exciting day to day with Final Fantasy 15 on the PC also launching. But I suspect there'll be more news at further on in the year. We're not going to be too far away from E3 soon, and that seems to be a pretty good time of the year to announce stuff. So maybe watch that space.
No doubt. And I'm not sure how much you can speak to this, but what are your thoughts on Chrono Trigger getting released on Steam last week?
Do you know what? It came out of the blue for me. It wasn't something I was aware of. And I've not had the time to look at it and play it. So unfortunately, it's kind of on my list of things to do. But in the past week, obviously with the build up to the release of Sedna, my kind of spare time's actually been playing Subnautica, which I know isn't necessarily a popular game for anyone who's not too fond of deep water and sharks, so I won't talk about that. But that's on my to-do list. Have you played it?
No. I have not had the time to even purchase it. Doing a JRPG right now is kind of hard when you've got at least 2 games to play per week.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely, this is a big discussion, I think, for the whole industry to have about the numbers of games being released. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have as many games being released as there are, but being a realist, and I was talking about this. I was asked to do a keynote at a conference in London last month, and one of the points I made is that, look, as an industry, I don't want to pick on Steam because, Steam basically created the opportunity for indies to release their games, and, they deserve huge credit. And I think it's unfair that they're sort of being singled out in some places as the cause of so many problems. But, if you just look at Steam at the moment and think of it from the perspective as I try to do, of a gamer, because at the end of the day, most of us working in the industry are in our hearts gamers, and that's why we're working in the industry. So I'm on Steam, and first of all, how do I get information about new games? Because Games Press, I mean, it was tough for anyone to keep up, kind of in the middle of 2016. But if you've got 250 games releasing in a week, let's say you do 2 reviews a day, that means that over 230 of those games are going to go unreviewed. And then the next week there's another 220 games, and then the next week there's another 230 games, and the next week, and so on and so forth. So as a gamer, how do I find out about all these new and exciting or rubbish games that are coming out? It's really hard, and there's almost this kind of sense of paralysis of, I don't know, well, let's just focus on the biggest ones, because those are the ones that are going to generate the most interest, or the most number of clicks, or whatever. So as a gamer, I don't really know where to go to get information on what's the best of that 250 games in that week. The second thing is that there's also this nagging fear in the back of my mind, or guilt maybe is a better word, that do I actually even need any new games? Because I've got like 30, 40, 50 games in my Steam library that I've not even downloaded, let alone played. And these are all games that I'm actually interested in, or had an interest in at some point. And I've gotten them in some promotion or whatever. And maybe I should actually get to those and actually start to, go down my pile of shame, whittle that down a little bit more before I start thinking about, do I need this game that came out that perhaps I don't know loads about, but, the Steam reviews are kind of okay, but, is it there? Am I going to like it? That's problem number 2, is that I've already got loads of games. And then problem number 3 is that if I don't know much about it and I don't need it day one, problem 3 is that I know it's going to be discounted in a promotion in the future. So if I don't have any urgency to pick it up, that's okay. I can wait 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, because I know I'll stick up my wish list, and I know it'll be there for 40, 50% off or whatever at some point, and then I'll jump in. So those are the challenges that we have today, which really weren't a thing sort of 2 or 3 years ago. They were starting to become a thing, but now those are all things that any developer is up against. And so there are so many games to get through, and there are so many games I want to play, and there are so many games that I look at and I think I need to wait until I've got time to play those games, because I want to play them properly. I want to give them the focus and respect that they deserve. And does that day ever come? Well, you tell me.
Usually for me, it's when the show goes on break. Outside of that,
Right.
no.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I keep thinking, it's like, I mean, I'm not close to it yet, but, I'm already starting making plans for retirement, which basically revolves around video games on Steam and shows on Netflix that between now and my retirement, I know that I won't have gotten around to watching or playing.
No kidding. I mean, it's not just a question for Steam, though. I mean, if you want the ultimate example, iOS and Android.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
We've talked a lot.
I find personally there are fewer games on mobile that I have that need. I really must play. But I'm
just talking
you're absolutely right.
The sea of games that are on mobile is just staggering, even compared to Steam.
Yes, for sure.
Right. So I'll see if my colleagues here have any final questions, and we'll wrap this up.
I'm good.
Yeah, I don't have anything right now. I'm looking forward to trying out Sedna, or at least the final version, but haven't quite gotten that yet, and I haven't had time, so.
Right.
Time. It defeats us all in the end. It's the ultimate end boss that no one is ever going to beat.
Yep.
Yes, time is the ultimate equalizer. And on that somber note, we'll wrap this thing up. Phil, it was once again great to talk to you. A lot of insight, a lot of data, a lot of stuff going on.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure once again, and I'll hopefully won't leave it so long next time.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, good luck with the future of the collective, whatever that might be.
Thank you very much.
We'll certainly be in touch when the next phase is ready. I'm sure we'll know.
Yes, for sure.
And anyway, right? So that'll.
I've dropped a few hints today, which when you do see future news from us, you'll think, okay, so that's what that meant.
Probably. I'm like, it all depends on how much I remember. Now, once again, we do like 1-2 interviews a week.
For sure.
Every week. So, information. Sometimes I forget more than I probably should, but that's just kind of the nature of this beast.
Indeed.
Anyway, so speaking of which, coming up tomorrow, we'll be having another good friend of ours, John Pickett of Manga Gamers, to speak on their latest, and hopefully you'll all join us then. Until tomorrow, I wish you good gaming.